Hey girls, welcome to December's Girls Code Club lesson. As promised last month, we are diving into our third language, JavaScript. So we already have HTML, we have CSS, JavaScript will be our third and final focus language for everything that we need in order to make our website look fun and function well too. So JavaScript is also known as, if you remember our sort of website as a home metaphor, it's the people living in our happy home. It is also known as how we make a button do something when we click it. So how's this going to fit in with everything that we have so far? If you remember, HTML puts things on our website. If we don't have any HTML, it doesn't matter how much CSS or JavaScript we add, we won't really have anything. So we use that, put elements on there, images, text, forms, videos, all of that. CSS makes those things pretty, or makes them sized the way we want, or makes them work a certain way and look a certain way and be laid out a certain way. And then JavaScript makes them do stuff, fun stuff. That's the most important. So in real life, in our house, JavaScript would be your little brother, sister leaving socks everywhere. It would be painting your bedroom. It would be your dog tracking snow in, running all over the house, making a mess. It would be decorating for Christmas, covering your website in lights and reindeer and trees and all of that. So all the things that basically we're taking action on the place that we are living. Speaking of actions, we write JavaScript using functions. Functions are just actions. So you might have scatter dirty socks. You might have paint bedroom. You might have an action for run dog run. You might have an action for decorate the tree. Those would all be functions in JavaScript, and we would fill out within the function what should happen when that function is called. And then we call those functions by linking them to HTML elements like button clicks. That's the most straightforward one. There are other ways, but in our case, especially for now, we'll practice using button clicks. So you fill things out, you click a button, and then that calls the JavaScript function, which performs one or more actions. So let's come up with an easy function that we could look at as an example. You decide that no matter what color it currently is, you immediately and desperately need your room to be green. So we're going to create a function called paint room, and in it, inside of our curly braces, I know this is a third language with third new syntax, and that's going to require a lot of going back and checking and making sure, but I promise they're all three just different enough. HTML is the world of the caret, which is what we call these opening and closing. And then CSS and JavaScript both get to share the curly braces. So at least those are common. So within our paint room function, we're going to say document, which is really just how we say, I want to work within the HTML document I've created with all my HTML code. Within that document, I want you to find the element by ID, and the ID I want you to look for is bedroom. So in this case, if we had an element for every room in our house and it was our bedroom that we wanted to paint, we would need to look for the one with the ID bedroom. And then we are saying that we want the style to have a background color of green, style of that element to have a background color of green. Then we'd create a button in our HTML. And when we clicked that button, we would call the paint room function, the paint room action. This is all going to look pretty familiar. You'll see that we have the input element. It has a type of button. We skip over here. It has a value, which means what's going to be written on the button that says, let's go green. The thing in the middle is the only new thing, which is to say that on the click of that button, very straightforward attribute name, I want you to call the function paint room. You'll see this matches up with this. So that's always how we want this to correspond when we call an on-click event, is the exact name of the function in JavaScript that we want to invoke. So I'm going to go through two general examples here in the slideshow and then go out and show you how to do them. These are also the first two examples in the handout. So if you're looking at that, you'll be able to see and recognize exactly how that shows up. So everyone has a favorite color. You might have more than one, but you probably have one that you like enough to look at it as the whole background of a gigantic thing you're looking at. So if you ask your website user for their favorite color, they could use a regular color word like yellow or white or green or navy or all of the other options. There's like 140 of them. In the first lesson, I have a link to the whole page that lists all the WebSafe color words, or they could go onto our color code site and look for a hex code for one of the basically infinite numbers of options if they really have a favorite, very drilled down favorite color. Have them enter that in that text box, then have them click the submit button, and we would change the website background color to whatever color they entered. So now, no matter what else is on your site, they're looking at it with their favorite color in the background, which makes them feel nice and at home. So now, in this example, we all have really, really fancy houses that have so in our second example, what if you wanted your butler, in this example, we all have butlers. So we have a very, very fancy house here. To ask every person coming into your house for their name and their favorite animal, and then you have this giant television that based on their answers is going to display a custom message to welcome them. Such a fancy house here. I cannot imagine this exists in real life, but in our imagination and on our website, because we are in charge of it, it will. So what we are going to need to do is create sort of a placeholder, I'm waiting message that'll display until someone shows up and answers the questions. Otherwise, it's just a big blank television screen, and that's confusing. We need to write the text fields that will ask someone for their name and their favorite animal. And we need to then, once they actually enter those and our imaginary butler clicks submit, change that I'm waiting message to a new one that's customized for them. So for example, it could be welcome, name they entered. I'm so glad you stopped by. I like animal they entered too. So now they're walking in, they've got their favorite color all over the place and their name and their favorite animal up on your TV screen. They're so, so excited to be in your house. A couple of things that that you saw in here that I just want to point out. So var, which stands for variable, is used in JavaScript to store and remember a value we're going to use later. So something like var color, and then we set this whole value to that, is our way of saying later on, I want to use just the word color to represent all of this so that I don't have to type all of this again. So that's helpful if you expect to use the color that they entered in multiple places, or if you're going to use the name that they gave you in multiple places, like you're going to use it to welcome them, but you also want to use it somewhere else to say goodbye to them, or you want to tell them your name as well. If you put it in a variable, it's going to be much, much easier to type out that variable name than this whole thing. Again, like I explained about this as you saw it back there. So this is identifying an element that is somewhere in your HTML, like a text field, by the ID that you gave it when you were making it. And then you put those together and you get this process of, in a variable called color, I want you to store the value for the element with the ID my color. So in this case, that would be a text field that you called my color, and whatever someone enters into that, whatever value they enter, when you click submit and call where this line would be in your JavaScript, the color variable is going to store whatever they entered. And then you could use it to do something like set the background color to that. If you didn't have this stored in a variable, then what would have to be on this side of the equal sign is this whole thing. And then this entire line would just be crazy, just way, way too much to do. Okay, so that is the end of our presentation portion. If we come right in here, so now this is our handout that you're likely looking at. This is going to be very similar to all the stuff I just covered. Honestly, this is one of the only times that I actually have a slides presentation, and it's only because there's so much sort of not code part to cover about JavaScript, so I like using that. So we have, again, a final reminder, or not final, you'll get this a lot, it's not final at all. Reminder about all of the different languages that we have and what they do. And then we also have this first step here. So now we're going to do the first example that was in our slides, which is doing the background color change. So in your HTML, you'll recognize this from last month. In your form code, you may even already have something very similar. You're going to have an input element with type text. The ID is now very important. That has to be there. And then you have your placeholder to ask, to prompt people for what they should enter. And then you also have a button, and the button now has an on-click attribute called that is set to welcome me as an action name. So we do all of that. We put all that in. Here I have my example where you can see all of that stuff right here. I have this, it's called My Color, it has a placeholder, you see it right here. And then I also have a button, the value submit, and the on-click function, welcome me. And then I have Snoopy hanging out in the snow. So that's our step one. That's all we need to do for our HTML for this. In fact, you probably already have this in there from last time. So as long as you confirm that you have an ID that you used and that everything else was good, you would be fine to proceed forward from here. You would just need to add the on-click attribute and the name of the function. That's important. Otherwise, if you click the button, it's still going to do nothing because it's not going to magically detect that you've written some JavaScript. So now we go into our step two, which is we get to write some JavaScript. So in the JS section on CodePen, which is this bottom section that so far we have not used, we are actually going to write our first stuff. We only need 4 lines, and one of them is just a curly brace, so that barely counts. We use the exact same thing that you saw in the slide presentation. We say that it's going to be a function. We use the function name, we use our double parens, and then we start and end the function with a curly brace. Curly brace opening, curly brace closing. We set a variable called color equal to the value of the element with the ID my color, so right here. And then we go through and we say that we want to set the background color of the site to that color. When we do that, this is what we get. We come over here, we have all of that. I have this down here like you just saw. If I come in here and I say red, if I'm being honest, red is not my favorite color, but I picked it because it was Snoopy's doghouse. So, you know, sacrifices. And we click submit, background color changes to red. I could do this with other even less aesthetically pleasing, that's actually not as bad as I thought, colors. We can do some of the more interesting colors, perhaps, that may or may not be what you would think of putting in here. But that's a really nice way to get to welcome someone by having them submit something like that, and then you changing the whole site to be exactly what they want it to be. And then you also can change it back if you want to, or you can refresh the page to change it back. So that's it. You wrote your first JavaScript. If that worked right here, if the background color changed to the favorite color you entered, you did it. You did the whole thing. That's super exciting. Take a minute and be excited. Pat yourself on the back. You just wrote a whole new language. And then you can move to the next step, which is adding the things we need for the second example on the slides, which still preserves the color. It's still going to keep doing that. And down here, you'll see it's still doing that as the first 2 lines of our welcome function. But we're also going to add 2 more questions that we ask. They're going to look exactly the same as the first one, except with a different ID and a different placeholder. So my name and my animal, placeholders that are accordingly. And then we're also adding this paragraph tag. This is the I'm waiting for you. This is the I'm waiting to learn about you so I can introduce myself as well, or I'm waiting to learn about you so that I can respond to how you answer. I made it a paragraph tag. You can make it a lot of different things. You could make it really large, so you could make it an H1 tag or an H2 tag, a little bit smaller. I did give it an ID because again, we're going to have to call it by its ID when we get down into the JavaScript in order to change what's inside of here to reflect their answers. So I just called it welcome because that seemed appropriate. And that tag is where we'll change everything based on what they provide us. So now in my second example, which has another Snoopy gift phrase, ice skating, you'll see I have my color still. I also have my name. I have my animal. Then I still have the on-click welcome me. So the only thing I added was the 2 additional questions. And then I added right here this paragraph tag with the ID welcome and some placeholder text right now. You can see where that shows up above the image, but below the form. And then we come back over here to step 2, which again is moving past the HTML, moving into the JavaScript. And we need to add to our welcome me function 3 new lines. You'll see them down here in purple. Purple is always new text that we need to include, new code. So we have one where we're storing, again, the value that they entered in the my name element under a variable called name. And then we're going to store the value that they included for the my animal element in a variable called animal. And then this is our last and tricky part. So we're going to find the element with the ID welcome, which we know is this one. And then we're going to call a property of it called inner HTML, which is basically the HTML that's inside of the tags. So this is the start of our paragraph tag. This is the end of our paragraph tag. What is in the middle, we can dynamically set if we want to, and we will here. And the way we will build what goes into it is by saying, in our slides example you saw, I had the welcome your name. I like that animal too. So in that case, we literally just build this sentence by saying we have welcome, comma, space, plus the variable name, which if you remember contains the value they entered for my name. And then we add an exclamation point. I like space. And then we're going to include the value that they entered for my animal, because that's stored in a variable called animal, plus, and then we have space, 2 exclamation point. So we're basically, this is almost like an addition problem. We are doing what's called concatenation of all of these things. The new code is just building this string of text. So it's a combination of just actual text and the fact that we're including these variables in there. If we already knew what these values were going to be, we wouldn't have to do this plus name plus. We could skip all of that and say, welcome, friend name. But we don't want to do that because we actually want to customize it. And so that's why we do the dynamic creation. And so then we now have a slightly more advanced introduction and welcome setup. So we want to see if the background color changed to the favorite color and if the text, I am waiting for you, new friend, changed to welcome your name here. I like your animal here too. Then we will have done it. So let's see if that happens. Over here, I'm going to enter light blue, which is one of those 140 recognizable colors. Best animal is, oh my goodness. Snoopy. Can't beat the ice skating. If I click submit, so now it changed the background to be what turned out to be a fantastic match for this, this image, to light blue, and then it changed this to be welcome, comma, space, Elise, exclamation point. I like space, and then Snoopy, which again lines up right there, space 2 exclamation point. So that customized all of this based on what I included right up here, because that's what I told it needed to do. And it's actually even easier to see in here when you can see the syntax highlighting. So you can see the welcome has a string portion in green, and then you can see that name is blue as a variable, which lines up with over here. And I know I've said before, it's especially true in JavaScript. If you feel like the syntax highlighting, the colors that are being done in here are off or look very different, it is almost definitely because you have something that's a little bit off. So it could be that you're missing a semicolon, missing a parentheses, you're missing missing a letter somewhere in here, and it's having trouble resolving the whole thing to exactly what it needs to look like. Okay, so I'm going to skip the extra challenges section. I'm going to do a short video on that I'll include separately. Really, the gist of the challenges is actually literally just extra things that you could add in. So examples of different questions you might want to ask and then change the text to use the new things. You also could ask for setting all of the text on the website to a favorite number, a lucky number that they include. So you would have a text field that would ask for a number, and then you would change all of the font size across the whole site to be that number, which could go well or could go very poorly depending on how high of a lucky number people have. And then the third challenge isn't actually related to this part, but it does bring CSS back in the picture. So you saw in here, this looks nice and boring. I think the only thing I did to it right in here, where I have my paragraph with the ID welcome, is set a font size and a font family. So it looked just a little bit different, but you could put a border around this, anything like that. So that would be the other challenge option. And then the last thing is really just this one bold line that goes in here. So this metaphor for our website as a house with the HTML making up all the elements, walls and doors and windows, and floors, furniture. We have nothing without that. CSS is what styles it. So we put paint, we put art, we would have a home of very boring things if we didn't have any CSS. And then lastly, our JavaScript is the people that live inside the house. So they're moving furniture, they're eating food, they're making messes, they're doing all that kind of stuff. They're actually living there, and they're the ones that might decide that I don't want the stove to be here anymore. I want it to be up here in the living room. I don't know why, I just do. And so they would be moving this line with the paragraph tag up into the living room div, would be the equivalent of them doing that in real life. So that's everything that we have in here. As always, if you have any questions, please reach out and let us know. I know this is a lot to digest, so it's absolutely fine if there are plenty of questions. If you have questions that aren't really a roadblock for you in getting your own pen done, but you'd love to have a group discussion about them at the next sessions, please send that as an email at some point as well. It's great when we get to have discussions led by questions that people have along the way, because usually other people have the same questions too. And this way we all get to learn together. So I will talk to you starting on Tuesday the 15th or Wednesday the 16th or Saturday the 19th. And hopefully we'll get to share a little bit of general holiday excitement around that time too. I'm also hoping that Snoopy's 2 situations don't necessarily come to fruition and we get a ton of snow in between now and then, but we'll see. I will talk to you all later. Thank you very much for tuning in. Have a good night.